Cool. Okay, there we are recording. Welcome everybody to the Contemporary Issue Sunday School class. We are glad to have you here on a sunny September Sunday, and we're going to have a good discussion today about firefighting. We have, obviously I have today with me in person in my house in front of my computer, Doug Knispel, former firefighter in his youth. And then Doug went on to a career with AT&T for many years, and now he is a ski instructor at Copper Mountain. But he has a lifelong passion for outdoor things and has talked to me a lot about the fires going on in California and Colorado now, so we thought it'd be a good topic for us now because they are still going in Colorado, of course. So we're going to talk about that, but first, a couple announcements. We are recording this for future playback, and I always do that with the permission of the speaker, and so this is being recorded. Muting. In the lower left corner of your screen is a little mute icon, and if you would, mute yourself so we don't hear background noise, and we can continue on without interruption, but if necessary, I can mute you here also. And also my general announcement about please be kind and respectful in your comments to our speaker and to each other. We value that highly, and if anybody goes overboard, I will mute them also for the remainder of the hour, but we rarely have that happen. And any other announcements? The church, I see, St. Andrew Church is going to have in-person service for the Saturday night service next Saturday. So that's a nice step forward.
Yeah, very much.
Toward normalcy. They're having limited seating. It'll be outdoors on the north patio, but that's a nice thing that they are doing there.
And the snow comes, right?
Till the snow comes, that's right. Really cold. But we'll see how that goes. And someday we'll be back in the building for our class here, and hope you'll come join us. And we'll probably continue to record and Zoom then too. But someday we'll be back in person. Okay, any other announcements? Anybody have anything going on that they'd like to share? Not much? Okay. We're going to start today with a little song that is relevant to the topic of forest firefighting. And let me see if I can play it here. Okay, hang on just a second. I need to do the share screen. And here we go. Johnny Cash. Classic by Johnny Cash. Like a forest fire.
Our daughter Carrie has been up at Fort Collins manning or womaning an outpost up there for the big fire.
Ah.
Yeah.
Ring of fire. Ring of fire. Okay, we just wanted to share that for a minute. Although he's singing about love, it's also like a forest fire. Well, Doug's going to introduce himself a little bit more. Go right ahead, Doug.
Okay. Good morning. As Ron said, I'm Doug Knispel. Some of you know me, and some I haven't seen before. I'll hopefully be your motivational speaker here for the next 45 or 50 minutes. I'm going to talk pretty fast at the beginning because I want to cover a lot of interesting topics included with smoke jumping. But basically, a brief bio myself. I went to school at Colorado State University at College of Forestry, which is a natural recruiting grounds for firefighters, and was able to work 2 years out of Fort Collins on a hot shot crew, which I'll explain what those are, and then 2 years out of Idaho as a smoke jumper. And very interesting. As I said, I loved all 4 years of it, and I'll get a little bit more into that as we get going. But I want to start and talk about fire in general. Fire is nature's housekeeper. Every year, thousands of wildfires are lighted by lightning. As a little tidbit, in a county area such as the size of Arapahoe or Douglas County or something, on a lightning storm, you could have, especially in the mountains, over 300 lightning strikes. And years ago, that's how nature cleaned itself. Of accumulated leaves, trees, brush, dead trees, you know, the whole kit and caboodle. That was what they did. Fires actually seed some trees. The lodgepole pine is seeded by fire. There are other trees that are like that. Some trees cannot tolerate shade, and so they would die out. And then the big one is wildlife. Wildlife comes back in after fires. So it's nature's natural cleansing device. And for millions of years, it did that job, okay? And then man came on board, beginning, of course, in the 1800s. And they used fire for their own reasons, which were basically clearing land, et cetera, et cetera. However, they didn't know how to manage it. And in 1910, they had a huge blow up, which literally combined 3 states, Washington, Montana, and Idaho, into one gigantic fire of over 3 million acres, and over 100 people died in that. And the Forest Service got involved. It was incorporating about that time, basically, and made this decision that we had to do something about it. And so what they did is they made this edict that said that basically they were not going to allow any forest fire to continue 24 hours after it had been discovered, which we know, as a lot of with government type of scenarios, is not necessarily realistic. And this was the case there. However, what it did was begin an era of stopping fires. And they would put out fires when they came as quickly as they could. Here's the problem with that. You either pay now or pay later with fire. In other words, forests need fire in order to thrive successfully. And so what has happened over the last couple of decades is we've had some blindness associated with fire management until recently. We've let fuels build up. We don't clean them out anymore. And of course, part of that is because of the urban environment of people. There's over 44 million people now in different forests that are around. We didn't have that before, of course, and that causes some problems. The other thing that we've had is climate change. It's a result of that. I mean, we've got higher temperatures, lower humidity, lower dew points, and we have basically potential combustion that is ready to burst out. We haven't done a good job up until recently of trying to understand that. However, the good news is that is coming to light. For example, if there was a fire in Yellowstone a couple years ago that was in an uninhabited area, and they decided to let it burn and to clean out the forest. And we do backfires to clean out the forest where we can. Again, we have to be careful about that, though, because of the people problem. But the idea is that we need to do a more responsible job of being able to manage that, rethinking this whole thing. And with that said, because of the type of homes, or the homes that we do have in the country, in the wilderness area, or the wild areas, I should say, it's a lot harder to do than it was years ago. There used to be a saying that said, if we did not manage forests today the way that we did years ago by nature, that we wouldn't have any natural forests. In other words, they'd just be all totally burned over. But this discussion is not going to talk about the fires in California. It's going to talk about the fires that were going on here in Colorado and other Western states. The fires in California are what I call an urban fire. They're fought by an outfit called CAL FIRE, which is basically a combination of a city firefighting force and an urban firefighting or a country fighting fire force. But the one thing you'll notice, get ready for the passkey. One thing that you'll notice is that when you see pictures of California firefighting, you've got roads, you've got fire trucks, you've got fire hoses. I never saw a fire hose. I never saw a road except when we walked out, and I never saw water in the 4 summers that I fought fires. It was all done differently. Now, again, that's because the nature of California, it's an urban environment, and there's homes that are scattered throughout there. But throughout the rest of the United States, or especially the western part, and especially what's going on here in Colorado with the Grizzly Creek fire, the Pine Gulch fire that are going on, We have basically, that's going on behind the scenes, and you can't see that. Partly because TV crews don't want to hike into the wilderness and try to film these guys at what they're doing. And that's what I'm going to be talking about, are these people, including, of course, smoke jumpers, etc.
Showing the big axe.
Yeah, this is called a Pulaski, and I'm hoping everybody can see this.
Yeah.
This is your basic firefighting tool that's used out there. This is the only tool I used, in addition to a chainsaw and some backfiring devices that we use and stuff like that. It's got a hole right here, okay, and then an axe on this end. If you don't have this, you're SOL in terms of firefighting. This is what you use to clear out the area, the fuel that's you're trying to burn on. You don't use hoses, you don't use anything else. And this is what they're doing here in Colorado and in most of the United States. So if you don't have one of those guys, you're in big trouble. Ron can testify it's not exactly light.
Yeah.
Okay.
Questions? Go right ahead. Doug did how many jumps? 280, did you say?
I've done two.
Doug, you jumped out of airplanes?
Well, I was able to get into smoke jumping because I had a background as a skydiving instructor, and I had worked 2 years as a in the hotshot crew, and so that helped me get in because it's limited. I'll talk about the numbers of. There's only like 450 that do it every summer, but basically that's how I basically helped me get in. Well, counting, if I count my free fall jumps and my firefighting jumps, probably about 325.
Oh my gosh.
In terms of that. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. Again, this is somewhat preliminary, but it's really important to understand what we're going to be talking about with firefighting in general. What I'd like to do, if it's okay, and then I know there'll be more questions as we get along, is talk about a little bit about how fires are managed, because it's managed through an outfit called the National Interagency Coordination Center, which is headquartered in Boise, Idaho. It was established in 1965, and it is truly the Pentagon for forest firefighting. In terms of that, it manages everything that's going on. It manages 9 different federal agencies, which is the Forest Service, the Park Service, the Weather Service, Fish and Wildlife, Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Indian Affairs. It's responsible for 700 million acres of federal lands and keeps an eye on every major forest fire and brush fire in the country. Literally, nothing moves forest fire-wise without them knowing about it. They can track every firefighter in the country, and there are 20,000 forest firefighters in the country. And that includes all kinds of crews. Of that 20,000, there are 450 smoke jumpers, and there's 109 hotshot crews, which are the ground version of smoke jumpers. They're the elite crews that go into the backcountry on initial attack also. There's about 2,600 of these. So the far majority there can be prison crews. They have specialized training prison crews. They have the people like the CAL FIRE people. They have all kinds of other ones that are in there doing it. But they're managing all of these people in terms of what's going on. They classify fires under a scheme of severity and complexity. And it starts with a type 5, which is just a lightning strike hitting an individual tree. And then it goes up to a type 1, which is basically a major type of fire. They have teams at the overhead level that basically manage these more sophisticated fires, larger, more sensitive fires. And it's pretty remarkable what they can do. And in fact, it's also, to me, pretty enlightening that we have a federal agency that works as well as it does with these guys. They can bring 24 people, they bring 24 people together to work on operations, planning, finance, safety, and logistics whenever you have a type 1 type of a situation, which occurs quite regularly. And they oversee 16 different teams that help them throughout the country. They manage all these fires, and I'll get a little bit more detail in a moment, but they also work on other things. They work on hurricanes, floods, winter storms. They were actually involved in the Columbia Space Shuttle disaster that happened several years ago. They sent teams to the Pentagon and to New York City after 9/11. So it's a very, very well-managed outfit that, again, is tracking literally everything that is going on in the world of forest firefighting today and every day. When a fire begins, say you have a lightning strike and fire comes out in a hillside in Colorado or Wyoming or whatever, somebody calls 911. and it goes to the local agency dispatch center, and there's about 250 of these nationwide. They send out a few firefighters to determine the situation, try to figure it out. If they can't handle the fire for whatever reason, they go to one of 11 regional hubs, which are called geographic area coordination centers. And if these guys cannot handle it, it goes to Boise. And Boise will muster the crews that are together to try to make this happen. And then they classify the fire between a type 1 and a type 5 fire. For information purposes, the fires we have going on in Colorado are on the higher end right now. They're on type 3, 4, and 5 in terms of that, between the Grizzly Creek and the other 2 fires that are going on. They're pretty remarkable in what they can do. For a major fire such as going on here, they can bring together, and this will be an interesting stat for you, 1,500 people in less than 24 hours with firefighting equipment, office supplies, radio networks, weather sensors, satellite feeds, catering, trailers, showers, toilets, the whole kit and caboodle. And it comes from a cache of about 11 regional warehouses that are throughout the country, filled with chainsaws and shovels and sleeping bags and tents and the whole kit and caboodle. It is one agency that works very, very well. Now, the price tag for this is an interesting one. It's $2.5 billion, that's with a B, which, Bernie, that's more than you've ever made in your lifetime. And I'm also sure that it's more than what Steve or Doug Moen has made in their lifetimes. And it's a Forest Service budget, but it's one of these federal budgets that basically you can go over whatever it takes. You're not going to let a fire burn because you don't have any money to fight it. But it's a large number is what I'm trying to say, that what it's costing to fight forest fires, and a heavy one on our budget. They meet every day. They meet twice a day, 7 days a week, and categorize these fires depending on what it is and deploy them out as they're necessary. I mentioned that level 5 is the worst scenario. In other words, basically where you're using every piece of equipment that's out there. And only a few weeks ago, we basically reached the stage where every firefighter in the country was being deployed to fight fires. That's 19,900 that were on the fire lines. That's all we had that were working on that. And so, again, it's a serious situation that continues every summer and is only getting worse, partly because of the changes that we have in climate, but also the fact that we cannot clean out the forest the way we did before. So it's not getting any easier is what I'm trying to say in terms of that.
Let's stop and take some questions. Sure.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a question? Unmute yourself. Stephen, you can't hear us?
Steve, it's
Yes.
hard to hear you when you're
Yeah.
off mic.
Ken,
We're
no,
not-
I can't hear you either.
We're not muted at the moment.
There you
Did
go.
you hear me? You could hear me though, right?
I
Yes,
can hear you, yes.
Okay.
and I can hear you as well.
Okay.
Okay, good. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'll speak up. Okay. If anybody's got a question, go ahead, unmute yourself and ask Doug a question.
Doug, what's the name of that group that oversees this again? What?
National Interagency Fire Coordination Center.
Okay.
And,
And
yeah, it's federal agency governed through or managed through the Forest Service. And they, as I said, they're the brain trust. They're considered to be the Pentagon for firefighting. And again, I'm very impressed how well they work. They work really well in terms of what they're doing. And incredibly how quick. That's the reason that they're put into natural disasters besides firefighting when it occurs. They can bring together, we have these caches, 11 throughout the country, that are just filled with equipment that are necessary to do natural disasters and or fires. Of course, they concentrate on fires.
Question, Ken?
Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah. How many people are employed at that center?
I don't know how many are employed. They have, the teams are, there's 24 people on a team, and they use 2 teams together on it. So there's 24 working all the time together, coordinating. They have auxiliary behind that, but there's 24 that are managing the resources that are necessary all the time.
Second question. What kind of an Air Force or air ability is worked with in in your, in firefighting?
Firefighting. I'm going to get to that in a little bit, but I can tell you briefly that
Oh,
there's two types. There's the big types, which you see on TV, the 747s, which are dropping slurry, and then the smaller ones that are used to drop smoke jumpers. So you have a little bit of an armada between large and small. Now, to discuss that in a little bit more detail in a few minutes.
thank you.
You bet. Okay.
Linda, go ahead.
Would you run through the categories again? What determines whether it's a 3 or a
Type
1?
type 1 is a lightning strike on a tree that starts a fire. A type 5 is a fire that is exploding to the sense of a Grizzly Creek fire, Pine Gulch fire that we have here in Colorado. It's usually one that are over 100,000 acres. And a little side note on that, a few years ago, it was an anomaly to have a forest fire over 100,000 acres. Today in Colorado, we have 2 alone right here, not counting the other western states. I mean, in other words, we're having a plethora of forest fires that are over 100,000 acres. And this is where they have to get together a lot of people very quickly. When I was when I was a hotshot, basically we got deployed we were on a fire site within 24 hours from Colorado to wherever we had to go. That's how quick they can bring people together.
Tell them where.
I
What
went
states?
everywhere between Arizona and Alaska. It's to me the greatest job in the world. I always said that basically the perfect job for me, in retrospect, if I ever get reincarnated, would be I'd be a ski instructor in the winter, I'd be a smoke jumper in the summer, and I'd be a river rafting guide in the spring. Which I did all 3 of them, but not concurrently. So again, that would be to me the ideal job if I could. Of course, but anyway, it's a neat way to live.
Hey,
You see
hey,
a lot
Doug.
of things that people don't see. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Hey, Doug, I'd join you, buddy. I'd join you on that, on those
You know,
career paths.
I have this saying I told Steve, I says, now I got to remember the darn thing is that growing old is inevitable. Growing up is optional. And that's my kind of thing that I try to live by. Those 2 things. I mean, we're all going to get old, but let's keep a younger mindset, if you know what I mean.
Do you mind if I tell them that you're 73?
I'm 73. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Those fires,
And
that,
Jim Watson, go ahead.
they continue 24/7. How long a shift does a firefighter work? They get exhausted, I imagine,
It's not a light job. You're on 16 hours and off 8.
Gosh.
Yeah, and until the fire's out. So with no days off. I mean, it's not uncommon in a heavy fire month to work 28 days out of the month in terms of that. I'll get into the physical. I'm going to get into the
forest. When they're off 8, what do they do?
You're sleeping. Well, basically what happens is those 8 hours that's to prepare your food for whatever you're going to eat. If you're out away from a food supply such as this right here, this is smoke jumpers that are eating around, because on the larger fires, you have whole cafeterias set up out in the wild, and it's pretty neat. I mean, they have anything and everything you want to eat. It's really well done that way. But you eat, you try to clean up a little bit, and basically try to grab some sleep. But you got to remember, there's transport time in between walking to and from the fires. Most of these things, there's no roads. Remember, we have no roads for what I'm talking about in here. So you're walking everywhere that you're going. One little funny story that happened was when we were in one fire in Arizona, we had a crew that worked overnight, and they were a bunch of Native Americans, and basically they wrote a half a mile worth of fire line in the wrong direction, and we thought that they were going to scalp the head fire chief that basically told them to do this fire line in the wrong direction. But basically, you're working basically almost every minute that you're awake, except for the time you're sleeping or eating, because there's no movies to watch out there.
Thank you.
One question. On Colorado Public Radio, they were talking about the fires in Colorado yesterday, and they were saying that fire burned areas today may not grow back with trees and forests like they have in the past, because it's hotter, climate change, there's less water. So some of these places that are burning will come back just as grassland.
Yeah.
So there'll be mountains with grass, but no trees.
Right.
Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. It's not prevalent. It depends upon the topography and the altitude and all the stuff that's going on, but it is true in some areas that can occur. Or it'll be delayed, let's put it that way.
Much
As you
longer.
know, when you have a fire, the problem with this natural burning I was talking about, people don't like the fact that it's ugly. But that's nature's way of coming back. I mean, it's got to regenerate, and it's not going to, you know, we're so used to things happening immediately in today's society, but with nature, it takes time to grow back. And so it, you know, there's that problem that people sometimes do not like, you know, fires for that very reason. I know I'm talking a little bit fast, so I apologize for that, but I want to be sure to cover all the stuff that I had. And this is somewhat preliminary background information to give you a viewpoint. Hopefully it's understandable in terms of that.
Let's talk about tactics to fight a fire.
Okay, you want to do that before history?
Sure.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Firefighting in terms of how you put up a fire is not an exact physical science that takes years to figure out. It's very, very simple. There's something called a fire triangle. And Steve, I'm going to ask you what you think that fire triangle is.
Oh, you mean the three
How a
elements?
fire burns.
Well, it has to have fuel.
And one more. Yes, heat.
Temperature?
Heat.
Okay, heat.
Heat, fuel, and oxygen are the three elements that are necessary for a fire to happen. It's pretty hard to eliminate oxygen, and it's pretty hard to eliminate heat, but you can eliminate the fuel. And that's the essence of how you fight a fire, is by eliminating the fuel or decreasing the fuel, whatever it is, in terms of that. And that is what you're trying to do when you're fighting a fire. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of scenarios here from a small fire like a smoke jumper would go on, where basically you're going to create a line around the fire that basically eliminates the fuel. And again, most of the fires that smoke jumpers are on the small side, and I'll explain what that's all about and why a little bit later. And you have a pictures here that'll show, like this one in the center, a fire line where it's 18 and 24 inches. Now, the thing you got to realize is that if a fire gets into the trees, it's called a crown fire. And basically, it's going to cross that 18 to 24 inches very, very quickly. What you try to do when on any fire is you find out where the head of the fire is. In other words, where's the fire going? And you try to flank it along the sides, and then you try to cut it off at the head, a little bit along the analogy of trying to put out a fire on a matchstick, if you or with a match. So you're trying to basically extinguish the fire that way. However, if this perimeter around the fire is to eliminate the fuel, so it comes up and it can't burn anymore because all the fuel is barren or taken away, and basically it'll stop. The problem is that if it gets into the crowns, the tops of the trees, that fire literally catapults out. In other words, it's like think of a Roman catapult in the olden days, throwing fire ahead of you, and that's what it is doing. And it's just going at a pace faster than what you can keep up with. There was more than one time when I was fighting fires when basically we had to go into a safe area, which was in this particular case, a rock zone, and we had these catapults of fire coming down on us, but we were surrounded by rocks, which is basically where our safe area was. The other safe area is you go for the black. In other words, you look for dark covered areas, i.e. blacked out areas where the fire is not going to regenerate in terms of that. But a crown fire is what you're seeing on TV a lot. I mean, it's the most dramatic and visual and what people see. When you have a crown fire, you can't do a whole heck of a lot about it except let that thing go to a point where you think you can stop it, i.e. a river, possibly a road, some natural lightly wooded area or something like that, where you can get a head start on trying to stop the growth of the fire, where it's going to come down from the tree level, get down to the lower level, and eliminate the fuel. It's also supplemented by fire tankers, which you're seeing in your picture here right now of various different types. This is one, I think Ken or one of the people were asking about it. There's a whole different plethora of these. Of course, the 747s are the biggest ones that are out there, but you have also helicopters that'll drop water out. We had a fire not that long ago up by the Georgetown area where I have a place, and basically they were using helicopters 24/7 to put these fires out through water drops. But these are some of the other ones. They're dropping a mixture called slurry. That slurry is something also called wetter water. if you know what that is. It basically increases the viscosity of the liquid. It's a combination of water and ammonium phosphate that basically, and it's colored, so you can see it from the sky. It's dropped out the head of a major fire. So what is going on here again, especially in Colorado, is they're trying to wetten down, you might say, the front part of the fire so that basically it's going to slow down, come down from the crown, get down into the lower levels, and we can manage it that way. But the problem and the reason that you see these fires grow the way they are is that once they're in that crown level, you can't do anything about it except let that puppy go until you hit an area where you can control it. There's a saying, on larger fires, only God puts out the fire. We can contain it and control it, but we can't put it out totally. The only thing that's going to put out Pine Gulch fire, the Grizzly Creek fire, the other ones that are out there is basically going to be winter and the winter storms that come along. As you may have heard, they'll say in Colorado now, fire season is 12 months a year, basically, for areas that don't covered by snow. The fire, what's the fire in Fort Collins? The Cameron Peak. If you notice that even with the snow that we had this last week, that fire, which is 105,000 acres, is only 5% contained. And you've seen pictures possibly of that. They had some decent snow up there. They had like 6, 7, 8 inches of snow. But that fire is only 5% contained because it just takes a whole entire plethora of water and snow to put out a fire totally. When a fire is controlled and you've got all the perimeter around it, you have a mop-up crew that stays on that fire until the last bit of heat is taken out of the last bit of coals that are out there. In other words, you can't feel any more heat. By Forest Service definition, a fire is not out until 24 hours after. We need to show that picture too of me. 24 hours after the last bit of heat and smoke comes out of the fire. So the big fires that are going on now, they're going to stay burning technically until the snow comes in terms of that. I'm going to do one thing real fast here did you want to do that?
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to show a picture. This is
Smoke jumper crew in Idaho.
Yeah, this is a picture of me without being in the picture. And then the reason I'm saying that is my group. I am the very center silhouette, which if you narrowed in on that, if you could do it, you'd see my name on there. There's 6 of us and we were on a fire. There's never going to be enough time to probably get all 26 of us together. And so in this particular photo, basically there were 6 of us that were on a fire and I was one of the guys that are at that very center silhouette. And behind us is a Twin Beach. That's one of the aircraft that we jumped out of. You got to remember that smoke jumping is done in small increments, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail, obviously. But that plane holds 8 smoke jumpers and 2 days worth of supplies, which is necessary to jump with. But you don't jump out of big stuff unless it's a huge fire. The DC-3 is the largest you jump out of, but that's an abnormality. You don't do it that much. The largest fire you normally would send a smoke jumpers on are 16 people. And when I talk a little bit more about smoke jumpers, I'll get into that. But I wanted to go back again to the controlling of the fire is the fact that the whole key is eliminating the fuel, determining where the head of the fire is going and try to cut that head off from growing any bigger through the devices I talked about, whether it's going to be slurry, whether it's going to be a natural element. And sometimes you just got to let that puppy burn until you can area where you control it. And that's obviously very frustrating. But what we're trying to do with major forest firefighting is eliminate that control before it gets into the inhabited areas. Whether, like for example, they don't want the fire to go to Fort Collins, or some of those other areas. And so they're basically trying to stop that before it gets into inhabited areas.
The story in the Denver Post yesterday said the Fort Collins fire went 11 miles into Rocky Mountain National Park.
Yeah.
And it didn't destroy any buildings, but the north side of the park was 11 miles. Still going.
And I know I'm talking kind of fast, but again, I wanted to just try to cover a lot, but I'm hoping that you understand that anomaly there, that basically you're fighting nature. And the only thing that's going to control the fire is going to be a combination of the terrain that it's in, it's going to be the landscape that it's going to be in, and it's going to be the conditions that are going on within there. Those are the things that are going to basically determine how fast that fire is going to go and where it's going to go, until it slows down to the point where man can control it by growing it, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. That's good. Got any questions? Go ahead, gang. Unmute yourself and ask a question, or we'll go into smoke jumper history.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Kim.
Why do you think that fire happened in Oregon? Because I think I heard the governor say, you know, we don't have a history of having fires in Oregon, and this just isn't a problem we have in Oregon. And then all of a sudden it was like the entire city of Phoenix, Oregon burnt to the ground, and all these people had to be evacuated. You know, you don't think of Oregon as, you know, Oregon has a lot of rain and it's not, you know, a dry area. So why all of a sudden is Oregon a hot spot for fires?
It's the same way that with Colorado, that even though the snow that we had recently, in a few days, you're going to have tinder dry conditions again. If you don't have moisture, it dries out pretty quickly. And that's the essence of what's going on in the areas. The other thing you got to remember is Oregon, and I used to live in the eastern part of Oregon near La Grande. That is incredibly different than the western part in terms of humidity and temperature and water. But basically, it's got to do with what water you're getting or not getting, and how quickly the fuels are drying out. And again, we're just, because we're getting hotter and warmer, that's increasing the magnitude of that.
Okay. Sounds good. Doug, are they doing enough brush management in the West? Should there be more cleaning out than there currently is?
Yeah.
What needs to happen for that to get done?
The problem with that is
Steve,
money.
speak up, please.
I was asking Doug if the brush needs to be cleaned out, the fuel better, and who would do that? The federal government clean out the brush more?
Well, especially
And-
on federal lands, they would. The problem is money. If you're spending $2.5 billion fighting fires, and you're overrunning your budget every year because the fires are getting bigger every year, you don't have any money for that other stuff. So it's a catch-22 is what it boils down to.
Okay. Go ahead with smoke.
Yeah. So the point I'm trying to say is it's right, unfortunately, not getting any easier. Okay. Let's talk about smoke jumper history and what's going on there. Smoke jumpers basically were established, 1934 was the first smoke jumping initiation, you might say. The first jump was actually made in 1940. In terms of that, I think the Wright brothers was only about 30 years below that. Before it was pretty soon, earlier than that. I can't remember when the Wright brothers did their thing, but it wasn't a whole lot earlier than that. And they have a very interesting history. In 1940, right at their initiation, there was a major, and I'm gonna give you some tidbits. William Lee from the U.S. Army, he became a major general, and he saw the operations that they were Forest Service was trying to do with smoke jumpers, and he went back to Fort Bragg and established the 101st Airborne Division, based upon what he saw for smoke jumpers that were doing it. The Special Forces visualized and worked with smoke jumpers in the 70s when they were getting going, and saw what they liked and basically incorporated some of their tactics. Although there's a difference, obviously, between Special Forces stuff in military and Special Forces and forest firefighting, which is what they consider smoke jumpers to be. But they liked what they saw, and they basically worked on that. As a little tidbit, when I was in the Army, if you know anything about Special Forces, basically they don't jump at low altitudes like smoke jumpers. They jump at higher altitudes, such as 25,000 feet, and they free fall down to about 1,500 feet and open their parachute, and that's to obviously distinguish themselves from the enemy. It's called HALO, high altitude, low opening. When I was drafted into the Army, and people who know me know that I'm not an Army kind of a person, but they knew about my background with smoke jumping and as a skydiving instructor, and they wanted me to be a HALO instructor. But I have no desire to stay in the military. I would have had to sign an extended commitment and all that kind of stuff. And so that's kind of history. I didn't do that. But the Special Forces saw a lot of commonality between what was going on in the 70s with smoke jumping and what they wanted to do with their airborne division. And of course, they've elaborated quite heavily on that now since then in terms of it. But one of the things really interesting about smoke jumping history, they had something called the 555th Parachute Infantry Battalion, which was an entirely Black airborne unit that worked during World War II. And another interesting thing you may not know about World War II was that between 1944 and 1945, the Japanese sent over 9,000 incendiary balloons to the United States in attempts to try to burn the United States. This is obviously when they were seeing the war kind of coming to not working on their favor and doing anything they could in addition to kamikaze attacks and so forth to try to win the war or get back into it. The 555th was designated to fight these fires. They made 1,000 of these balloons, made it over to the States and caused fires in the Western United States. And that was their job. They were one of the first racially integrated units that we had in the country.
So the Black smoke jumpers came to put out the Japanese fires in America.
Yeah,
Is that right?
Yeah. They're airborne. They weren't considered quote smoke jumpers, but I mean they did
Okay.
smoke jumping job. I mean they were airborne. It says like the 101st. They jumped with static lines, etc. But
Little known history of America.
they made 1,200 jumps to put out fires. They only had one fatality in that whole time, and did a phenomenal job. And as I said, it's one of these unheard stories about military history and also a little bit about smoke jumping in terms of that.
Cool.
Another one that I thought was extremely interesting had to do with, in my unit that I jumped out of McCall, Idaho and out of Idaho City, we had a guy who left the unit in late May, early June to Alaska. Now he was a veteran. He'd been there for about 5 years. And I didn't know him very well, but he went to Alaska to work, which is not uncommon to transfer people around. The unusual part was that he left the 1st of June and he did not come back until April. And when he came back, he had a sunburn and he had jungle rot. And I'm sure that if Bernie's listening, he knows he served in Vietnam. Basically what jungle rot is, it's basically a lesion that goes between your toes especially and causes great discomfort in tropical areas. Alaska's not that kind of environment. And so everybody was scratching their heads as how did this guy, what was he doing, where was he or whatever. And it wasn't, and as any unit that's works together and smoke jumpers are a very tight unit, you communicate with each other until people went other ways. But about a year later, we found out that he had been in Vietnam. And then we found out a little bit further after that he was working for the CIA under covert operations that worked with the CIA. And recently, and this came out in a Washington Post article of 1970, I think 2017, it was only a few years ago, that said they went to Laos as smoke jumpers and came back as in coffins. What happened was the CIA developed a covert operation that began in the 50s and extended into the late 60s and early 70s, started out in Tibet, and also Laos, then later Cambodia and Vietnam, basically to drop supplies to guerrilla forces that were fighting the communist forces. And they used smoke jumpers, and they used smoke jumpers because one of the jobs you do in smoke jumping as you get more seniority is you work on other things such as dropping the supplies down to the smoke jumpers that have landed. You're dropping at a low altitude, basically about 1,000 feet under unversed terrain or whatever it is like that. And smoke jumpers fit in perfectly for this, in addition to the fact that they tended not to be braggadoso. They would not brag about what they were doing. They basically were self-controlled, basically well-behaved, self-motivated, responsible. Some people say, how did you ever become a smoke jumper with those traits?
So you had
but I did.
So you had some spies in the war.
But the biggest thing,
We got 15 minutes left, Doug. I want you to be able to
do this. Okay.
tell them about this thing that's on the screen.
Okay. But anyway, the last thing I was going to say was they were not military. So they could work on covert operations and we could say the military was not there. But that was what they were doing. Okay. Did you want to show the video? Okay.
Tell them what we're looking at.
We're looking at a fire tent. These fire tents came out after I was there. We didn't have them when I did it. Basically, they are there to try to deploy you from a fire that's going. You got to understand a couple things that are with this. A typical forest fire will burn at about 1,500 degrees. Some of the disasters that gone on, they've gone as high as 2,000 degrees. They're supposed to deflect 95% of the radiant heat, but at 500 degrees, they will start to delaminate. At 1,200 degrees, the foil starts to melt. At 1,400 degrees, the fiberglass starts to break down. And at 2,200, the silica breaks down. And basically, it kind of is worthless. Unfortunately, if you have to deploy this and you get into the intensity of a fire, the superheated gases are going to kill you before the fire does. But you practice using these things, and they are used and they do work. But when you get into a major disaster type thing, it doesn't work very well.
Fire's overrunning you, you get on the ground and you get in this tent and you hope it saves you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the disasters that are more recent, they've had these. Some of them they were able to get them in time. You've got 20 seconds to try to get into this thing theoretically before you're going to get overcome on a major fire, because a fire can go 100 yards in 20 seconds.
Wow. Okay. Okay, let's show them the gear, picture of the gear. Talk about requirements and the picture of the gear so we can get all this in.
Okay.
Sound okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
You want to do the video too then, or not?
The video comes after
All right.
this.
So I'm going to show you the gear real fast, and then we're going to show you a video of what's going on. There it is, right there. Okay,
Go.
and you'll notice there you have a high collar there. That's for tree landing, so that you do not land in the tree. I mean, when you land in a tree, which is going to happen, you're protected, especially your upper body area, the neck area. You have your parachute harness. You have a reserve parachute that's there. Basically, on his lower right, you have a helmet. It also has a face shield that's there that allows you to basically be protected again from tree landings. You're going to land in trees, and you got to realize that when you go in there, that tree landing is inevitable in terms of that. And then you have a little satchel on the lower part of his body below the reserve parachute, which basically is there for personal gear. So it's pretty big and lumbersome, sort of that way. Okay. One thing I want to mention about that reserve parachute, the one you see right in the center, a couple interesting tidbits to bring out. I was going to write, I had a little note on here, but I can do this from memory, hopefully. Basically, you deploy at about 1,200 feet as a smoke jumper. That's the average jump altitude. It should take about 3 seconds for the parachute to open on a static line, which is what is used smoke jumping in military operations. If it doesn't, that's where your reserve parachute comes into play. But in the first 3 seconds of determining if that parachute opens, you've dropped down 150 feet. It takes about 250 more feet at least to deploy the reserve parachute, which means that you're now basically at about 400 feet, or you got about 800 feet left. The one thing I haven't included is think time into this. In other words, obviously you got to mentally realize what the heck is going on and deploy it. That reserve parachute is you pull the ripcord, but you have to hand deploy part of it because you don't have what's called a pilot chute to bring out the main chute, which happens in main chutes. And so you've got some direct time that's in there that's, you have to figure out, help get the thing out. And what I'm trying to say is you don't have a lot of altitude. The United States Parachute Association says that you are supposed to open your parachute no lower than 2,000 feet. We jump at 1,200 feet as smoke jumpers. So right now you're jumping at a lower altitude than what they want you to do because of that very reason. When I skydived, I had to deploy my chute 3 times, my reserve chute 3 times.
really?
But again, I was at a safe altitude.
Did you survive?
I survived.
Good. Great, great.
People said I might have hit my head on the ground too hard because that's why I'm the way I am, but that's what happened. But essence was that at 1,200 feet, you have 9 seconds before you hit the ground if you do not do anything. That's not because gravity accelerates at a compound rate. So it's not like you fall 200 feet in the first 2 seconds. So in 400 or 4 seconds, you're falling 400 feet. Mm-hmm. In 6 seconds, you're at terminal velocity, which is 120 miles an hour. So what I'm saying is that, theoretically at 1,200 feet, you've got about 9 seconds. Actually, at that altitude is more like about 10 seconds before you would hit the ground. So the reserve parachute, and what I'm trying to say is it will work, but you know, it's more psychological, if that makes any sense.
Did you ever fall into a tree and get stuck and have to climb down?
Yes. And what you have to do there is that you basically grab that tree as best you can, because you do not want it to collapse on you and drop you to the ground. You have a letdown rope, which is in that picture we saw a minute ago, that'll let you go down. The problem is some trees are longer than their letdown rope. The letdown rope is about 120 feet, and there are some trees that'll go over 200. So you want to land and hug the tree when you land it so it doesn't collapse your parachute if you're going to land in a tree, but then you got to let yourself down.
Cool. Okay. We got about 9 minutes left, and Doug wants to show you a 2-minute video which shows a lot of this in action. So we're going to run the video now and hope you can see it. There we go. Oop, just a second. Gotta click the right button, but this is pretty cool. There we go. Okay.
Can't hear the video.
We'll stop for a second for questions, but I'll add one more thing and then we can do that.
Okay.
The training on this is pretty intense because of the equipment you're carrying with you. The first day that you report to smoke jumper school, basically you go through a physical test, which is
Sorry.
okay. Is everybody okay? All right. Which you do 25 push-ups in 60 seconds, 45 sit-ups in 60 seconds. You do 7 pull-ups. Then you have to run 1.5 miles in 11 minutes or less. That's not overly arduous, but what is really tough is that you then are put on a 3-mile hike, basically that you have to do in 90 minutes carrying 110 pounds. And that's because that's the amount of gear that you carry out when you come out of a fire, counting your 2 parachutes, counting your chainsaws. Anything that's dropped into the fire, you carry out, except for the food that you don't eat or whatever like this. And so it's a very rough training element in terms of that. And you're expected to have, you cannot be, at the time I did it, older than 46. I think they've raised that limit a little bit longer than that. But again, so you're in good physical shape. 20/20 vision in one eye, 20/30 in the other, good hearing, stuff like that. So you got to be physically fit because, again, when you're working 16 hours on and 8 hours just off, that how much and you're carrying that guy around. It's arduous, okay, in terms of that.
We got about 5 minutes left.
Doug, what kind of compensation do those firefighters get?
And by today's salary, you make about $16.73 an hour as the starting wage. But here's the good news. You got to remember, you're working 16 hours on, 8 off, and you get time and a half for overtime over 40 hours a week, typical on that. You also get, you don't get jump pay per se, but you do get hazardous duty pay. And so you can come back with a lot of money. I mean, because you're working all the time. You know, when I was a hotshot and it would take us 24 hours to get to a fire, we were paid 24 hours. So it's well-paid job. I mean, the hourly rate necessarily isn't high, but you're making a lot because it's compounding that quickly.
Yeah, they earn it.
Yeah. Okay, you want to do the firefighting disasters?
Yeah, real quick, there's 3 main disasters that have occurred in firefighting. The first one is called the Man Gulch Fire, occurred in 1949. That occurred, there were 16 jumpers that came out and 13 of them died. It began the area of fire science and basically how to basically manage fires. This is a picture of Man Gulch Fire, and what you'll notice in Montana, yeah, it's in Montana. And basically what you're going to notice there is that there's no forest there because the firefighters that were killed in that were fighting a fire below where these trees are in the bottom part of the picture. The fire jumped the river and went up this grassy hill and overran them, literally within 45 minutes of them landing is what happened on this. And it was the first major disaster. At this time also, when they jumped, they had one radio which broke when they landed. And so it began this, and this is only 9 years after smoke jumping started, where it started to understand fire science a little bit better and then how careful we had to be. Because I think I mentioned that fire, when it grows, when it gets into a blow up, it's incredibly fast.
And Doug, you mentioned that that picture is 70 years later and it's not grown back any trees.
Yeah. But a lot of it was grassland. Again, what happened was this jumped from a forest into a grassland area, which overran them. The foreman that survived it created a small little backfire before the fire got intense, and he jumped into that. The other guys panicked, which is another thing that they realized that you got to have cohesion anymore when you have dramatic situations like this. But they went around him. He survived because he went into the burned out area. They went around him trying to climb up, but you're trying to climb up a steep hillside. Fire that's moving, I said, 100 yards in 13 seconds was what they timed it at for this fire, or what they thought it was going at. The South Canyon fire is also known as the Storm King fire. Happened in 1994, basically near Glenwood Springs area. They have a area you can actually hike up to where the jumpers were. There was no jumpers. It was a combination of people that died there. 14 died, 3 smoke jumpers, 2 helicopter crews, which jump out of helicopters to fight fires, and 9 hotshots were all died in this thing. And it was a blow up. And this fire, when it started, it burned for 2 days and nobody thought anything about it because it was just smoldering. But it bothered a residential area that was going around there. And then all of a sudden the wind came up, and I was saying the wind is such a critical element in fire suppression that basically, and they jumped in there and basically it blew up in a magnitude that was unprecedented before and overran these guys before they could get out. All fires, you have lookouts. You should have safety zones and dead zones, but you're fighting Mother Nature. Mother Nature's not controllable, and they're, in spite of all the stuff that you can do, you're going to have stuff that's going to happen occasionally, either that or you have an, incorrect communications that's going on or whatever, that'll happen. The third one is the Yarnell Hill Fire. This happened in 2013 in Arizona. There was 19 members of a hotshot crew that killed. And this was, they think, human error. They went out of a safe area into a box canyon loaded with debris, and basically a blow up occurred, and it overran all 19 of them within a matter of seconds. They were all found in a U-shaped type device, because in firefighting, you work together. You work in a line to try to knock down the fuel. So you're all together. And so unfortunately, when they have these disasters, you have a congregation of people. And because of the speed the fire is going at, basically you don't have time to dissipate, and you just got to react.
There was a movie about that just a couple years ago starring Josh Brolin. I can't remember the name of it now, but I watched it. Good movie about that, Arizona. We're about out of time, folks. It's 11:31. Got any final questions for Doug?
Thank you very much. Wonderful.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Doug. Thank you,
We-
Doug. Great presentation.
We
Thank you.
covered a lot, and we thank you. We're glad you survived your years of jumping out of airplanes. And come back and tell us about something else in the future, too.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm proud of my brother.
There you go.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Next week, Ron Puning is going to give us a book report, and we hope to see you then.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Okay, bye.